The Committee for Workers International is a revolutionary socialist organisation fighting to defeat capitalism and replace it with socialism internationally. In the next few days, there'll be elections taking place throughout Europe within the European Union to the European Parliament. The last elections took place 5 years ago, before the pandemic. Since then, of course, the world situation has been utterly transformed. We've seen the horrors of the war breaking out in relation to the Ukraine, the absolute nightmare of the genocidal attacks against the Palestinian peoples in Gaza. We see an entirely new world situation of a dystopian character of capitalism. And it's against that background that elections are taking place. And what do those elections signify? From the point of view of the Committee for Workers International, we have no confidence in the European Union as an institution. It's there as a capitalist club to defend the interests of capitalism. We oppose it, however, not from a narrow nationalist point of view, but on the contrary, from an internationalist point of view. We stand for the unity of the working people throughout Europe and indeed internationally. We've seen the character of the European Union reflected on many occasions, how it defends the interests of the rich, of the powerful, and of the capitalist class. Look back a few years to what it did in Greece, to what it did in Spain, to what it did in Portugal. Together with other international institutions of capitalism, it imposed horrific austerity measures which had a devastating effect on the lives of millions of workers and young people. It serves nothing for the interests of working people. But nevertheless, we're faced with elections through this institution, and we have, of course, to face up to the reality of what that means. We would contest those elections to support parties on the left in some countries to use that as a platform to propagate the idea of workers' internationalism and a socialist alternative to this capitalist institution. Unfortunately, we see at this stage globally a trend towards militarization, reflected in a number of countries, including within the European Union, the prospect of further conflicts internationally taking place, and we see the role of German imperialism, French imperialism, and all of the other European powers in the conflicts which are unfolding globally. Now, in this election, it seems most likely that unfortunately the far-right parties, the racist parties, are going to make substantial gains. That really reflects the absence of an alternative that's been presented from the left and from the working class itself. We believe it's necessary for real socialist candidates and parties to be built that defend an international socialist alternative to the EU and an international socialist alternative to capitalism. In the next few minutes, you're going to hear comments from our supporters and members of the CWI in France, in Germany, in Austria, in Ireland, explaining the position that concretely exists and the political position that the CWI is advocating in all those particular countries. We're also going to hear the experience of what happened in Britain with Brexit, which left, of course, the EU itself, which we supported coming out of the EU because we opposed it, but not on a narrow nationalist basis, but on the basis of an international opposition of an international socialist character to oppose the capitalist European Union. So look forward to participating in the elections, to use them as a struggle to build a platform for an alternative to capitalism. And in the next few minutes, you'll hear concretely what supporters of the CWI are doing in these European countries. And we appeal to all of our viewers, not just to listen to the video, but to join us, visit our website on socialistworld.net and join the struggle to build an international socialist alternative to capitalism.
Hi, I'm Cécile from Gauche Révolutionnaire, the French section of the Committee for Workers International. The situation around the elections is extremely polarized. And in this Euro election, only 47% of voters are sure to go vote. That's because the political crisis is very acute. Macron's party might not even come second in the election. They are right now neck and neck with the so-called Socialist Party. Macron is going to be punished yet again in the elections for his policies. With his Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, it's attack after attack. But the feeling of revolt against this rotten government is only growing. In shops, in businesses, in workplaces, in the street, the anger is really palpable. Macron has been pushing new threats to unemployment insurance. They've been saying that they're going to cut 10 billion euro in the public services next year, and then another 20 billion in 2026, etc. Not to mention 130 redundancy plans. And as for the big capitalists, they're pocketing billions thanks to Macron. No less than 154 billion euro in profits in 2023. What we need to build is a massive response from workers and young people. Right now, as is often the case with wars, the massacre in Gaza is an eye-opener. 7 months of demonstrations every week, and part of the youth movement is mobilizing in a very significant way with demonstrations and actions in colleges before the school year was over. And once again, the government, with the direct and total support of the far right, the Rassemblement National, RN, and part of the so-called Socialist Party, is using the mobilization against the genocide in Palestine and repressing it. And that's not for nothing. This movement is really calling Macron into question, his international policy, but also his policy in France. The European election on 9th of June must be used as a referendum against Macron and to strengthen us for the battles ahead. Let's give him an electoral slap in the face this Sunday. Our side, that of workers, young people, and the majority of the population, need a clear-cut victory against this government and the bosses. We didn't get one against the retirement reform with the mass struggle last year, and it's understandable that some workers and some young people will not going to go vote because they are disgusted by previous votes, especially when our no vote in the referendum about the European Constitutional Treaty was completely denied from us. But this election is an opportunity to say that we don't want this European Union of the capitalists. The EU is an accelerator of attacks that we must continue to fight. Over 65% of the population are suspicious of the European Union, and that says something. Le Pen and Bardella, the far right, are polling first in this election, with a campaign focused only on immigration issues and claiming to be the only opposition to Macron. And this is clearly what is giving them this boost and this advantage. It's clear that they're hiding what they're standing for. The first preoccupation of voters in this election by far is purchasing power, i.e. standards of living. But the RN say nothing about rebuilding public services, lowering food prices or rents. And Bardella is actually the dream candidate to oppose Macron Attal in the election. A massive RN vote would in no way undermine Macron's policies. Gauche révolutionnaire, we've been saying, on the contrary, that a vote for the France Insoumise list, Mélenchon's organization, led by Manon Aubry, is, if it is massive, will have an impact on what happens next. The MEPs of La France Insoumise have voted against all the neoliberal treaties that undermine public services in Europe, including energy liberalization and austerity measures. This is not the case with the so-called left of the SP or the Greens. But as we all know, this is not really decided in the Euro Parliament. The MEPs won't be able to stop their attacks unless we, the workers and young people, get organized and fight back together. A very important vote for La France Insoumise will, above all, be an encouragement to once again take up the fight against Macron and the capitalists' plans. Our side, that of workers, that of the majority of the population, needs a combative, unified political force against the government's attacks, against racism, against war, and against capitalism. For us, the EU elections on June the 9th will be an opportunity to put a slap in the face electorally, not only in Macron's face, but also the racist pro-capitalist policies of the RN. The France Insoumise list is in that way, in that regard, the best place to express the need for a real fighting opposition to Macron. This is what Gauche Révolutionnaire we have been campaigning for. But more broadly, today is the whole capitalist system that is being unmasked, as it means more misery, more war, more famine for the majority of the population. So it's against the capitalists and their system that we must fight. For a socialist society, that is the only way to put an end to exploitation, colonization, and war. Against capitalism, for a socialist society, join Gauche Révolutionnaire in France, join the CWI.
The present European elections are coming at a time, a critical time for the working class in the south of Ireland. They coincide with local elections, and they come a mere 7 or 8 months away from the next general election. We see that the current elections take place within the context of a really devastating housing crisis that afflicts the vast majority of working class people in one way or the other, in terms of friends, relatives, family members who can't secure affordable housing for themselves. We have a situation where global capital has muscled in to the provision of housing in the south of Ireland for very high returns. In general terms, the establishment parties seem to have held their position. There's a bit of a rally for some of their candidates in the polls leading up to voting on Friday the 7th. And the main story was Sinn Féin, who are the populist nationalist alternative party to the establishment parties, and in whom very substantial numbers of workers are placing their faith to bring about real change to benefit the working class. They were holding a very consistent polling lead for the last number of years. That seems to have collapsed quite significantly in the past week. We are seeing a rise in anti-migrant sentiment. There are attempts by the establishment to make migration the key issue in this election. It's actually not on polls. It's not the main issue for working class people, which remains housing and jobs and employment standards and things like that. For the first time ever in the history of the South, we see a very substantial number of far-right candidates running in election. A lot of these candidates have long track records of violent activism against the LGBTQ community, etc. Now, they're spread out across a number of parties, and they're getting small votes, but they still have to be watched. Far more significant are the independent far-right candidates. They're too clever to run under a party banner, but they have far-right views. So this is something that really poses a threat to the labour movement, to the workers' movement. And it's something we'll have to watch in the future to see where that goes. As the crisis of capitalism intensifies, will this cohere into a more unified force? That's something we'll have to wait and see. It is a long-standing objective of the Irish political establishment is to join NATO and to basically formally bring the south of Ireland into NATO membership. The war in Ukraine allowed this agenda to advance quite considerably, and it is part of the debate at the moment. The majority of working class people in the south want to continue with the current situation where the Irish state remains a neutral state outside of the NATO alliance. The left in these elections, and these elections coincide with local elections, so the left's challenge, we wrote an article where we identified 56 socialist left candidates running in the local elections, and there's about 7 or 8 left candidates running in the Euro elections. In Dublin, Claire Daly, a former member of the CWI, potentially could be returned. She's a sitting MEP. We wouldn't agree with an awful lot of her positions at the moment, but she is regarded as on the left by many working class people in Dublin. Bríd Smith of People Before Profit was polling quite significantly and looked like she could be on course for a seat in the European Parliament, but Her polling lead seems to have diminished in the past. But it is a problem in the sense that the left challenge is quite small at the elections. The people before profit candidates in the north and northwest constituencies and the south constituency are both polling at very, very low, lower indeed than many of the far right candidates. So that's a problem for the working class and a problem for the left. It poses the question, and we ask this question, and it'll have to be we'll have to come back to it after the elections and after the next elections to the National Parliament, the Dáil, of building a mass workers' party, what that means and how we go about it, because we definitely need that party.
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm a member of Sozialistische Offensive, the CWI in Austria. In the EU elections, the right-wing populist parties are expected to do well. In Austria, we've got the far-right Freedom Party, the FPO, leading the polls. But actually, we've already had two government participations by the Freedom Party in 2000 to 2006 and also in 2017 to 2019. Both ended in corruption scandals. Both led to a drop in votes of the FPO because they had implemented cuts when they were in power. The pension cuts in 2003 and then prolonging the maximum working hours to 12 hours a day in 2018. The thing is that those drops each time have only been temporarily because the conditions that made the FPO strong were still in place. A crisis, a social situation that caused dissatisfaction and a vacuum on the left. Like in other countries, we have seen intense crises in the last 4 years, with still above EU average inflation now and people struggling to make ends meet. This time around, the vote of the FPO is actually just slightly higher than in 1999 and in 2017, but they are leading the polls because the two main parties, who are both in crisis, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, are only polling at 23%. What is different this time around compared to 1999 and 2017 is that this vacuum on the left is beginning to be filled. Now we don't have a mere shift to the right, but a polarization. The pro-capitalist Social Democrats elected a left leader, Andreas Babler, last year, but like Corbyn, he has not used his position to fundamentally change his party. At the same time, the Communist Party, following local election successes in 2 cities, is now polling at 4% compared to 0.9% in the 2019 general election. This is also an expression of the beginning rise of class struggle in the workplaces because of inflation within the last 2 years. The CP has a lot of weaknesses, but one thing that the Communist Party does right is that they demand a workers' wage for politicians with a political mandate and only take a workers' wage and donate the rest. They also consistently took up housing as an issue. They had been campaigning on this in Graz, which is Austria's second largest city, for 20 years. So they have a reputation for being consistent on this issue. The weaknesses they have, though, is that they have at times a charity-like approach. One of their claims is helping people instead of talking, when instead they actually should be organizing class struggles to improve the living conditions of the working class. They are also leading a local coalition in Graz, where they won the mayor in 2022 and then formed a coalition with pro-capitalist parties, while having slightly improved the housing situation in Graz by not raising the rents for public housing as much as, for example, the Social Democrats led Vienna City Council did. They did, however, stick to the capitalist budget rules and have started to not fill vacant posts, which is a gentle form of staff cuts. They also didn't translate their success into building a movement of the working class as a basis to defend and improve living conditions. We are nevertheless calling for a vote for the Communist Party in the EU elections, but most of all, we are calling on people to get active and build such a movement. Our approach to battling right-wing populism is not to support other pro-capitalist government coalitions. In autumn, we have general elections in Austria, because this would just be kicking the can down the road, and it will increase support for those parties if they are left as, for the right-wing populist parties, if they are left to be the only opposition party, as we have, for example, seen in Italy. Our approach is also not, unlike the capitalists, to merely say right-wing populist parties and their racist politics are morally bad. We need class unity and joint class struggles for better living conditions for all to actually combat them. And we need to get rid of the very thing that made them strong in the first place, which is capitalism. Long as capitalism exists, the problem will continue to exist, even if the left temporarily gets support, as the Communist Party currently does, especially if the left is not succeeding to improve living conditions, which is likely if they support or take part in pro-capitalist government coalitions. The working class needs their own parties, and while we do not make this a condition to supporting them, we also fight for those parties to take on a socialist program that is willing to break with capitalism. The CWI is trying to build a revolutionary force that fights for that and to make capitalism and the problems that it causes history.
So at the same time that the European elections are taking place, there is also going to be a general election here in Britain. And on the 4th of July, the Tories are going to be thrown out of office. They are hated for the austerity and attacks on the working class that they've carried out over 14 years. And they are going to be destroyed, do very, very badly in the coming general election. Some of their vote is going to go to reform, to the right populists and the racists. They've also been known as the Brexit Party and UKIP, but fundamentally it's the same bunch of people. But they're not going to be the main people who gain. Labour, or to be more accurate, Starmer's new Labour, is going to win the general election. Potentially, they could win with quite a big majority, what you could call a landslide. But it is not going to be like the landslide back in 1997 when Tony Blair came to power as leader of New Labour Mark 1, because there is a real lack of enthusiasm for Starmer's Labour. People are going to vote for them as the only means by which they can get rid of the Tories. But honestly, it really is not a question of enthusiasm, and no wonder, because the programme that he's putting forward is all about making hard choices, and that means hard choices attacking the interests of the working class. And on all the fundamental points, it's really no different to what the Tories are saying. Still, of course, there will be hopes. There were always hopes when you get rid of a hated government after 14 years. So there will be hopes that Labour's got to be at least a bit better. But the main people who are happy about the idea of a new Labour government are big business, the capitalist class, because they think correctly that a Starmer-led government will be able to do a better job for them than the current Tory party. But while Labour might get a big majority, formally speaking, that is not going to be as a result of a big surge in votes for them. There is definitely going to be many workers who stay at home, others who protest by voting for different parties. It will be the collapse in the Tory vote that brings Starmer's Labour to power. And it's absolutely clear in this election, there is potential for a mass party of the working class to do very well. It doesn't exist, so that's not what's going to happen. But that has been the case for a whole number of years in Britain, that objective potential exists. If you go back to the Brexit referendum, at base, from the working class, that was a mass expression of anger against the existing order and anger against all of the capitalist establishment politicians and the capitalist class who were arguing against Brexit. And the right populists, including those in the Tory party, the likes of Boris Johnson, were the main people who harnessed that mood. But there was nothing automatic about that. There was another expression back at that time of the huge anger in society, and that was the election of Jeremy Corbyn as a left anti-austerity figure as the leader of the Labour Party. And in the 2017 general election, Labour took over 1 million votes from UKIP as a result of the surge of enthusiasm among workers for his programme. Now, historically, Jeremy Corbyn had the attitude that the EU is a boss's club and that he opposed the neoliberal anti-working class laws that it implemented. And had he taken that stance, then he could have mobilised left support for Brexit on the basis of international working class solidarity and the idea that a Corbyn-led government would demand a renegotiation of the EU in the interests of the working class and appeal to workers across Europe to take that stance. And that would have had a very big effect. Unfortunately, his probably very first retreat from under pressure from the right wing, the pro-capitalist majority in the parliamentary Tory party, and Starmer was critical on this as an individual actually, was to retreat on his historic position on the EU. And that left a vacuum which the right stepped into. But we could have had a very different situation. Of course, today, those retreats continued, and Corbyn is not even allowed to stand in this election as a Labour candidate. He's out of the Labour Party. There have been numerous other, in the recent period, examples of how there could be a mass party of the working class. At the height of the strike wave here, the biggest strike wave since the 1980s, two of the trade union leaders launched a political campaign, Enough is Enough, and 500,000 people joined it virtually overnight because they were looking for a new party. Unfortunately, that's not how those leaders saw it. So we've ended up with a general election where there is a big vacuum here. There is not a mass voice for the working class. That doesn't mean there's nothing happening in this general election. Jeremy Corbyn is standing as an independent. There are some other independents standing, some of those who've been pushed out of Labour, others who've arisen out of the anti-war movement. And we are standing as part of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, which is a banner under which any workers, activists who want to see a new mass party of the working class can take steps to stand in the elections. And Tusk will be standing 40 or so candidates in this general election. And after July the 4th, we will have a Labour government. We could also have a small bloc, but a bloc of left MPs outside of Labour that can, from the beginning, give voice to the mass struggles that are going to take place against this Labour government. The Tories fundamentally are in crisis as a result of acting in the interests of British capitalism. Labour are going to do exactly the same, and they are also going to enter crisis, are going to have mass struggles against them, probably quite quickly, and out of that, the political issues are also going to be posed, and it's on that basis that the Socialist Party is going to be intervening in this election.
German capitalism was once dubbed Europe's powerhouse, but now it seems running out of juice. Last year, the economy was in recession, but that does not spoil the party at the stock exchange, where the DAX index is at a record high and they are popping champagne bottles. This year alone, over 50 billion euros were given to shareholders by the top 40 companies. They are widening further the enormous divide between the super rich elite at the top and the mass of the population, the working class. And the crisis for the majority, for the working class, is very real. Billions of euros of investments in our schools, on the railways and public services are missing. German companies are again cutting back on tens of thousands of jobs, and real wages are still below the level of 2015. So the traffic light government of Olaf Scholz is rightly one of the most disliked and distrusted in many years. They have made life worse and more expensive for working class families. The arms industry, on the other hand, is reaping massive profits, as hundreds of billions are spent on rearming German imperialism while social services are cut. This is what they dubbed Zeitenwende, a change of times. The German elite is preparing further militarization as they want to take a leading part in this global struggle for influence, for resources and profits. And the capitalists are calling for more. They are demanding a real onslaught on workers' rights and living standards. They're calling for bigger attacks on working conditions, on pensions, on social security and the right to strike. On the 9th of June, European and several local elections will take place in Germany. Social Democrats, Greens and Liberals will rightly be punished at these. But working class people will not have a real choice to vote for a party of their own. In the absence of a genuine mass working class and socialist alternative, disillusionment is widespread. The conservative CDU will likely win, but their supposed strength comes only from the government's weakness and not from any enthusiasm for their policies. The far-right AfD will gain votes, although the scandals around their top candidates in the European election have dented the party's positions in the poll in recent weeks. But the AfD, like their counterparts in other countries, nevertheless pose a big danger to the working class, to democratic rights and those of women, refugees and minorities. They act as if they were an alternative to what we have, but their neoliberal policies would as well only suit the rich, and their divisive ideas offer no answer to the very real social problems of so many. The absence of a party that viably represents workers' demands and struggles is felt keenly in Germany. But the important news is there is struggle. Workers have shown a renewed will to fight over the last 2 years, and in a long time we have not seen so many strikes in different sectors. Although from a very low level, trade union membership is also beginning to recover. But those struggles unfortunately don't find a political expression at the moment. So we, as SOL, the German section of the CWI, are fighting for combative and democratic trade unions, but also mass working class political representation, a mass party of the working class, a party that shows how we can fight staff shortages, poverty wages, and bad conditions when we strike together, when we fight together, when we fight massive underfunding in education, health, and public sector by taking the money needed from the super rich, fighting poverty, climate change, wars and militarization, racism and sexism by uniting the working class behind a program against the power of the banks and corporations, and for a different, a humane and socialist society. In these elections, we critically support Die Linke, the left party in Germany, and we call for a vote because despite its deficiencies, it's still closest of all parties to represent this approach. Die Linke is rightly calling for public ownership of housing and energy companies and raises the ideas of socialism in its manifesto. But it dodges very real problems that those ideas come into collision with the makeup of the European Union as a capitalist institution which will not allow fundamental changes for working people. Die Linke is far from living up to the needs of the situation. It is in a deep crisis and its future looks very grim as it failed to seriously and radically offer an alternative to the government policies for a long period and its participation in coalitions on state level where it manages capitalism and cuts and not challenging them. It recently split with a number of MPs around Sarah Wagenknecht founding a new party, which does get some support for criticisms of the government and anti-war stance, but however embraces market economy and strikes a nationalist and anti-migrant tone instead of calling for and supporting united class struggles. So a mass socialist alternative is absent in Germany. But despite this, we have no reason to despair. Elections only ever represent a given moment. Big anger is boiling down below, and big class battles are already on the horizon. We are calling on the trade unions, on left organizations and social movements to fight all cuts and prepare to fight against those the capitalists are demanding for the future. And we link this to the need for workers to have their own party, and we fight for this in trade unions, in Die Linke, and everywhere else where we struggle. But building a Marxist organization, building SOL and the CWI is vital because only Marxist ideas can show a real way out of the crisis that capitalism offers and will be vital in building the tools, the organization that are needed to abolish this system.